Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's class, drawing the planes, or drawing noses using the planes of the face, part 2. I'm your instructor, Adrienne Hodge, and if you missed part 1, you can find part 1 of our class from last week on YouTube by searching the keywords drawing noses using the planes of the face, part 1. And Ilse, our lovely moderator, just dropped the link in the chat for those of you who want to save that and watch it later. So tonight's class, we will be continuing on from last week and finishing up using some chalk pastels to draw a nose. And then we're going to move on to using pen and ink for most of the second part of this class tonight. So and then this is all part of a little series that I'm doing this summer on eyes, nose, and lips. So you can stay tuned and check out the lineup of classes for August, and we're going to be drawing lips using the planes of the face. But over the next couple of weeks in July, we're going to be working on a water-soluble oil painting of a still life item of a mango, and I just realized I forgot to grab that, but it's right across the room, so I'm going to grab it real quick so I can show you what that project is going to look like. So we will be creating a little still life painting like this on a lovely little artist loft canvas that can just go right on your wall afterwards, or you know, maybe you may not get to this level of finish by the end of our class, but you'll definitely get all of the tools to paint something like this wherever you are in your art journey, as I always like to say. So yeah, the next couple weeks we'll be working on this. We'll start out with an underpainting, and then we will work towards a product like this towards the end of part 2. Okay, so I'm going to set that aside and switch to my tabletop view and go over supplies for tonight's class. Okay, so don't forget to tag your work that you make from the class with the hashtags Make It With Michaels or Michaels Classes. You can also hashtag Learn with Michaels, and you can follow me on Instagram at Adrienne Hodge Art, or follow at Learn with Michaels on Instagram as well. And here's some of my business cards. I'm also on Facebook, Adrienne Hodge Fine Art, if that's legible. Okay, so just setting that aside and going to go over the supplies for tonight's class. So we're really finishing up one of the noses from last week because I really wanted to do a full color facial feature at some point in this little series this summer, and so why not the nose? And last week we worked on a 3/4 view nose that looks like this at the top of the page in the part 1 of the class. So we'll be developing something that looks like this, and then we'll be moving on to some illustration paper or Bristol paper and working on pen ink noses like this. Okay, so I'm using the Generals brand chalk pastel pencil set here with all of those colors, so 12 colors in that set. And for the chalk pastel portion of the class, I'll be using the Artist Loft drawing tone pad here with the toned paper. And then for the, oh, and I should also mention that I'll be using a kneaded eraser for that portion of the class, and I'll be using a number of Artist Loft blending stumps or tortillons. So some that come in a set like this, or they also come in some, you know, drawing kits that have some different erasers and pencils, etc. And maybe even some of the illustration pens come in those basic sets. I know I've got a few of those here. In those basic sets, they just get mixed up in all my supplies once I start using them. And then I'm using the Artist Loft illustration pens, a set that has believe 6 or 8 pens in the set there. And then the Artist Loft illustration paper, it's the Bristol Vellum. So it's going to be the smoother of the, or I'm sorry, it's going to be a little rougher of the Bristol paper there. So it's the same one that I used for the drawing expressive eyes class that we had, I guess a couple weeks ago at the end of June. It's all blurring together now. Okay, so I think that's everything. Seemed like there were more supplies, but I believe that's it. And then I included this document, this PDF with our reference images for both part 1 and part 2 of this class. And last week we drew some of these noses towards the beginning of the document here. And then for tonight's class, we're going to be focusing on my nose quite a bit. So this one here that's got all the nice pinks and purples is the one that we're going to look at for the chalk pastel nose here. And then this one here is, well, I mean, I'll say which photo we're using whenever we get to them. This is definitely my daughter's nose down here at the bottom. This one's more of a cute little button nose there. So we are looking at child facial features in throughout this, child and adult facial features throughout this series. And yeah, okay, so I am going to go ahead and get out a fresh sheet of paper and get started on duplicating this lovely nose here. So I've got my toned drawing paper, and I'll review briefly and refer back to some of these recent classes, but mostly I'm going to be moving forward. Last week, we actually ended up finishing the class kind of early, and I thought about maybe getting a head start on this one, but we decided to do some questions at the end, and that was really nice. I think we didn't have a whole lot of questions throughout the class, and then we were able to answer a lot of questions at the end. So that is a good policy. If there aren't any pressing questions during the process here, we could maybe wait until the end and maybe we'll have some leftover time to answer questions. But please feel free to interrupt and ask any questions in the chat if you're confused. And then, yeah, if it's a matter of repeating something from a previous class, then we might just refer you back to one of those previous classes. Okay, so I'm just going to dive in here with these chalk pastels, and I'm not going to do any, practice sketching in pencil or anything first. Sometimes folks get nervous about jumping in with supplies that they feel like are maybe more permanent than others. And so I just want to show you that you can erase these chalk pastel pencils as long as you keep your lines on the surface of the paper. So I'm going to take a darker color here, this grass green, and I'm going to use it on its side, and I'm going to let it just sit on the surface of the paper. I'm not going to press down too hard, and then I should be able to erase that completely or almost completely. I mean, I can still see a little bit of where it was where I pressed down a little bit, but if you're just keeping your marks on the surface of the paper, you should be able to erase enough to satisfy, removing some stuff in order to, cover something up or move forward. So yeah, don't be afraid of jumping in like this. I will just review very briefly, just like some basic concepts here before we get started, just to get us back on the same page, get us all thinking in terms of these planes of the face. So last week we mapped out one of these noses using the elevational curves that we're seeing throughout the nose. And we talked about how the nose is not flat and two-dimensional, Just 1 second, I'm looking for another one of my sketches here to show you. Okay, so like with the eyes, we talked about spheres, turning a circle into a sphere, and how we need to keep in mind that the eye has a lot of spherical shapes to it, but it also has, there's some cylindrical shapes and some convex, concave areas, you know, depending on like the eyebrow, etc. And the nose coming in next to it. So we talked about looking at a cylinder from different perspectives and how the view, the eye line of the viewer really changes how you're going to view something like a cylinder. Like if my eye line is above a cylinder, I'm going to see the top of the cylinder, and then I'm going to see the horizontal axis elevation curved down because I'm looking down at it. And then if I'm looking up at that same cylinder, I might see a horizontal axis that appears to be curved in an upward direction. And then if I'm looking at a cylinder head on, there may appear to be an equator line down the center and then a curve up above that and a curve below, and you're seeing neither the top nor the bottom of the cylinder. So that's the same thing when we're looking at any three-dimensional form, and the facial features are three-dimensional forms. So with the nose, we talked about a cone shape. But the nose also has a bit of a cylindrical shape. There's a bit of a cylinder here in the center as well. And then overall, it may feel very cone-like. And then down here at the bottom, it feels spherical. Over here on the side, it feels like a little cave because there's an indentation here under the eyebrows going towards the eyes. And then same thing down here, it sort of radiates or spirals out towards the lips. And all of these contour lines or elevational lines, having an understanding of these lines really helps you to render the 3 dimensions of the nose. And what we really want to do is get away from this idea of hard outlines around the facial features, or these imaginary shapes that we tend to learn in childhood that we might continue to draw faces with because we just haven't slowed down and observed them. So we maybe are drawing things like this, trying to force things from our imagination. And these are more based on symbols of things that we learned in childhood, right? So we've been talking about how it's these contour lines and the 3-dimensional planes of the face really help us to see how there is no hard outline, right? And it's more about what the light is doing. And the light is always going to fall across these contours, across these 3-dimensional planes. So the shadow that's falling across the side of the nose, it is falling in a way that follows this curve, this slope down the side of the mountain here, this side of the cone or the cylinder. So having an understanding of the planes of the face in addition to the value is what's helping us be able to render these facial features realistically and make them feel more like 3-dimensional forms. So that is what we are going to continue on with in looking at this nose now. So, and then I include, and most of my reference images, handouts, I try to include black and white images, inverted images, true color images, all these different versions of the same photo, just to help you see these irregular shapes and these value shapes. Because I recognize I've been teaching adults for 10 years now, and it's really hard for a lot of beginners to just see these shapes, to see these organic shapes. So having the photograph being black and white like this maybe can help you to see them. And if that doesn't help, maybe the inverted light can help you to see them. Or, you know, maybe you see them with the true color image. So I like to include a few different versions. All right, so we're looking at this photograph, which I took at a children's museum with my kids, and we were in a room that had a bunch of cool different lights going on. So there was obviously some pink and green lights that were showing up on my face. And I just thought this was a fun one to look at because we could play around with all these interesting colors that we're seeing here. And also this will really help with understanding skin tones a little bit and how our skin reflects natural light, even though I'm looking at some, very exaggerated fun light here, but that's just the thing. Our skin will reflect whatever light is around. Like I always like to say, if I'm in a pitch black dark room and I light a match, you're only going to see my face illuminated in parts. Some of these value shapes will be lit up based on wherever the match is falling across my nose, right? Or like this photo, my daughter was in the little sliver of sunlight coming through the bedroom with the curtains mostly drawn. So there's all this big heavy shadows falling because of all the curtains, but then there's this strong sunlight coming across her face. So there's a lot of light, but there's also a really strong shadow here. And we'll be drawing this one in pen and ink a little later in the class. But then oftentimes when the light is really washed out like this, it can be really hard to know where to put these value shapes because the light is not quite as obvious. So that's why the inverted light can be helpful. But at all times, there might be like a color that you might use, like let's say the makeup color that I would use. And I am extremely pale. So I always buy the palest makeup that they possibly have. So this peach color would really work for me. But if you were drawing someone with a little more melanin, you might have this Van Dyke brown handy. That might be the base color. Think about like what makeup color would that person use. But then if we were to just draw the entire face, the entire nose for tonight, if we were to do it just using that makeup color, the base color of the skin tone, we're not going to capture what light realistically does as it's falling across the face because our skin reflects light and we also reflect different colors that might be in the light. So if you're in really fluorescent lighting, there might be some grays or greens when somebody's really pale like me. So there's like some grays and maybe some greens. There's definitely some greens in this one because of the fun colors of the lights that were in the room at the time. There's these purples and pinks, etc. But let's say the person's just in more warmer sunlight like this one of my daughter, then you're going to have warmer tones, like more rosy hues, etc. So there might be like the base color that the person's skin tone is like that darker brown or maybe a peach color, but then you're going to have reflective light that's going to maybe give you grays, you're going to have greens, you're going to have blues, you're going to have really all the colors of the rainbow. And that maybe seems weird, but whenever you do that, you're going to hit something that feels more realistic than if I just colored the whole thing with that makeup color because of the way that skin tone reflects light. Okay, so I'm going to actually start with the most prominent color in this image, which is that pink. So let me get, and also I'm doing that because it's going to show up more on the screen than if I started with my peach hue here. So I'm going to use this pink chalk pastel. And if you don't see my lines at first, if y'all could just be patient with me as I build up my drawing, it will become more visible on the Zoom. I feel like I'm always fighting with Zoom when it comes to light drawing mediums like this because I just, again, it's the light. The light is just only picking up what it can. And when something's really light on the page, it's hard for the Zoom to pick it up. So I'm starting with these value shapes. And yeah, if you missed part one, just try to stick with us here. if you, have no idea what I'm talking about with value shapes or contour lines or anything, and everything I just said was your first news of any of it, just hang out. Maybe things will become clear by the end of the class, and if not, you can go back and check out those other classes. So I'm looking at the organic shapes, and I'm just going to go ahead and outline all of them since this pink is so prominent. I'm outlining this big organic shape. And maybe you turn your paper upside down. I'm starting with this pink color on purpose because it's nice and light and I can easily cover it up. So if any of my shapes are not quite right and I need to draw them again, it'll be easy for me to make adjustments early on here. So once I get more confident in where I'm putting all of these lines, I will add some darker colors and I will bring it to life a little bit more here. But all I'm doing right now is looking for the double-sided shape. So like there's a little crescent moon shape over here on the side of the nose. And maybe I'm even looking at this longer shape that the crescent moon connects to. Feels like a little spotlight maybe. And I'm mostly leaving these shapes empty, not filling them in yet. Now I'm on the what appears to be dark purple shapes of the nostrils. And I'm seeing like, it's like a little ladle right here, like a dipper, like the Big Dipper on this nostril. And I'm not worried about perspective, or sorry, I am worried about perspective. I'm not worried about facial proportions being exact. I'm not worried about capturing a perfect likeness, especially if this is your first time drawing a nose like this. Please give yourself a big break and don't worry about this looking exactly like my nose. Like this, unlike some of our other nose models, like the model who I photographed a while back, Demetrius, was one of our nose subjects last week, and then my daughter. I do not care if you make it look like me. So I am more just looking for something that feels realistic and three-dimensional here. And I even made my nose a little too narrow in this one, and that's okay. We just want it to look like a three-dimensional nose. One thing about most people's faces is they are highly asymmetrical, and my face is very asymmetrical, especially my nose. I always like to joke about how crooked my nose is whenever I'm teaching about facial proportions, and how if you can capture the exact lopsidedness of my nose, you're going to make it look like my nose, because that's what my nose does. It's a little lower on one side of my nostrils is a little lower than the other one. And I even have what I jokingly call a third nostril because one of my nostrils is kind of scooched over to the side, and the center of my nose is a little off center. So all of those things are what make me look like me. And having that little extra space for one of my nostrils, and how the center of my nose kind of curves down and one side is a little lower. Like if I hold my pencil right here, this nostril comes down at an angle in relationship to the other nostril. So it's those subtle ways that you capture those asymmetries is what's going to make it look like that particular person. Okay, so I think I've got my shapes where I want them, and now I'm gonna draw with a little darker pencil here. I'm gonna use my my violet. Just realized I'm missing I have like a rose violet that I must have pulled out of this kit and replaced with something. I need that color. Oh, I'm gonna have to make do without it. That red violet was really helpful with this particular drawing, but oh well. So this one will look a little different than the other one because I just realized I'm missing that. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and use my violet and start to outline like that little ladle or hook or crescent shape that I was seeing for this nostril. And yeah, things should become a little more clear now that I'm drawing with a darker pencil. It literally is just the zoom has a hard time picking up light lines, y'all, but I wanted to just get them drawn in there first. So I'm going really light on the surface of the paper. I'm not pressing down too hard as I start to outline this bigger organic shape that I'm seeing here. And this is the one where maybe if you drew it upside down, you might have an easier time getting this big organic shape to come across. But we're looking for just a big organic shape there. So something that looks like, if I turn it upside down, let's see what it looks like. Maybe feels like, oh, what does that look like to y'all? Looks like a bird. It's like a head of a bird up here a little bit, like with its mouth open. And then down here, I guess it could be, I don't know, kind of feels like half bird, half fish shape, or like a ribbon. It really doesn't matter what you call it, but you're looking for some irregular shape here that looks like that shape. And then we want that to follow the contours of this slope down the side of the nose. And then since we're thinking about color with our light here, we want to look at the colors that we're seeing underneath. And we want to fill in those colors first, and then work our way up to the colors that are on top. So it gets pretty dark right here, but my skin color is underneath there a little bit. You do see a tiny bit, especially right here, of that peach color shining through a little bit, and definitely the pink. We want to fade from this violet to a pink, and we want that blend from violet to pink to be subtle. So, and then right here in the middle, we've got kind of a greenish blue happening here. So we'll do some green, we'll do some purple here, but then we want this peachy color, and then our white over here, and then more pinks all the way around. So I'm just going to take this peachy color and start just building up my value underneath. That's why I didn't just go for it filling in that purple yet, but I wanted to outline it so that y'all could see it. Okay, so I'm going to use the side of my pencil, and mostly I'm just going to get it over here to the right because I feel like that dark purple and green really take over towards the middle. But see how I'm following these contours? I'm going up that slope with my mark making here. And I'm using the side of the pencil to keep it soft. I can use my blending stump or my tortillon as well here, but for now I'm just going to stick to that, just the pencil, and then maybe I'll go ahead and start to blend it out a little bit with the pink to get this edge to feel nice and pink. Let's go ahead and actually fill in some of this pink, all the places that we're seeing it. So everywhere we're filling in the pink, we are following that curve. Actually, I'm like, before I do the pink right here, I need the peach to be underneath it. I need whatever color's underneath it to be there. So we don't always need the peach color everywhere. We only need the peach color where it's kind of shining through underneath. And there's some places where I would just leave it blank. I'm just going to leave it alone where the light is shining more directly and it appears more solid, absolute white in some places. So I'm building up the peach color kind of on the outer, around that highlight that I'm seeing on the left side of the nose and to the left of our big shadow here. Building up the peach, following those contours, following those curves. So keeping in mind those three-dimensional curves that we've been talking about throughout this series so much, all of those elevational shifts. And you could even start out like we did last week twice. We started out drawing the planes, the elevational shifts on the nose first, and then put the value on top with the charcoal. You could do it that way if you really need that kind of scaffolding for yourself to know where you're putting this value and to be able to follow those contours. I'm just keeping those in mind as I go. So I'm kind of going in a circular motion with my chalk pastel, doing a little scribbling motion and just following these curves. I'm just filling in that peach everywhere that I'm seeing it shining through underneath all the pink. And just getting a bit of a base layer going. So like I said, if you were drawing someone with a darker skin tone than me, then this might be more of a tan or brown color. Black skin tones tend to reflect a lot of violet. So the lighter areas of a very deep dark melanin skin tone, you might have more of like a deep purple reflected light, or maybe some indigo blue. And then yeah, paler skin tones tend to pick up a lot of grays and not reflect a lot of gray tones. So like when I showed the photo of me in just like some more natural light, you saw there was all the grays and maybe greens and blues. And so it can sometimes be really easy when you're drawing somebody who's super pale to make them look a little dead if you really pay attention to the reflective light, because you're like, well, I see gray, so I'm putting gray. I see blue, so I'm putting blue. And you get all those cool colors in there, and it can start to feel a little sickly. And so if you kind of take a page from the Renaissance era, just warm it up, just add some rosy pinks and some warmer hues to it, then it'll start to feel like it has a little more life to it. So that's a little trick. And then this photo just naturally, because of the room that I was in with all those pinks and purples and greens and fun colors going on, we've obviously got a lot of those colors being reflected on my skin. Okay, so that's pretty good for that base layer of peach, I think. And then now I'm going to use that pink. You just don't want to, if you're really trying to capture representational color, then you really want to think about what's underneath. And as I'm adding this pink, I might use my blending stump to blend it out a little bit. Need a bigger piece of big stumps actually. And you could use rolled up paper towel or a tissue for if you didn't have a blending stump. So I'm still just using the side of that pencil. I'm keeping it really parallel to the paper, using my whole arm to blend out, following these contours, and really just matching the colors and shapes that I'm seeing. So I'm seeing some pink here, and it's following that three-dimensional curve of the tip of my nose. So as I put it on, I'm curving my lines. Even as I'm blending, I'm curving the tortillon in a little circle here to imitate that curve on the side of the nose, the tip of the nose, and then over here on the side of the nose, curving with that shape. And then we've got that little cleft here down that connects to the mouth. So in that little crease, we'll start to get that pink that's showing up there. I'm really missing my red violet. That would really bring some of these to life. I'm gonna have to blend with my regular violet and try to make that red violet happen. Okay, so we're getting pretty close to done on this one because we're building up to those darker values. And once we get those darker values in there, this whole thing's gonna come to life. I quoted one of my students from an in-person class last week from a class many years ago. A woman was really struggling to capture likeness in a portrait in a painting class, and then she left and was practicing what, all these things that we were talking about, and she painted at home for the week, and then she came back to the class the following week and brought in her painting, and it was so amazingly improved from what she had been doing the week before. And I said, "Oh my gosh, what did you do?" And she said, "I just painted the light and a nose appeared." And I wrote that quote on the board that day because I thought that's it. That's what you got to do. You got to just look at the light. And technically we are painting right now. If you're using chalk pastels with me, these are, anytime you're blending and using multiple layers to create a work of art, you are painting. So this is technically a little nose painting we're doing here. So on this kind of slope where it goes into the flatter part of the cheek, I'm using more of a diagonal hatching line there because it's pretty flat in that area. We're getting it to flatten out a little bit. Okay, so I've got the peach underneath in the shadow right here. And then maybe along the side here, and maybe a tiny bit here where the light starts to creep in at the edge of the shadow. But then I'm going to use my green here, this grass green along the edge. And I'm looking at that slope, that kind of downward slope that's happening down like the side of a mountain, because it's exactly like that. It's like the side of a mountain here. So following those contours. And then I'm going to add some blue on top of that. This indigo blue. Really using the side of the pencil. And I can go pretty dark up here and maybe even use a little more pressure on the pencil for this darkest part of the shadow up here at the top. And again, I'm curving with those contours. So I want that little curve in that indentation there to show up. Thinking about that elevational shift. So it may look like I'm just filling in the shape, and I am, but I'm also making sure I'm curving with that elevational shift down the slope and the side of the nose. And I'm keeping it nice and soft. And then I'll go ahead and switch to that violet. And maybe I'll keep my pink really handy here because I'm missing that red violet. So I really want this pink to connect to my violet here at the edge. So I get more of like a red violet to happen. So remember, we want the color underneath to show through. So that's the pink. And we want this recess, this deep recess here on the side of the nose to really come across. So maybe you're pressing down a little more in that area for that shadow, or maybe you keep it nice and soft and blend it first and then go back and do another layer. That is a good plan to take it slowly. Keep it nice and soft and then blend it and then do it again, because then you're going to have more control over what you're doing there. Oops. Okay, go ahead and get this dark shadow here at the side, and I can use the tip of my pencil if I know I've got this shape in the right place, because I want this to show up nice and dark. I might even use my black right here to make that appear even darker. But the darkest pressure on the purple should be enough to get it super dark in comparison to all these light pinks and peach colors. And then for my little, I just realized it's like a Nike swoosh in there, for my little Nike swoosh nostril. Go ahead and go super dark on that too. Although it's not the same thickness all the way across. It's maybe, this is my little third nostril moment right here. This is where I always like to quote the movie Napoleon Dynamite. I already quoted it last week, but it's worth doing it again, where he brings the girl the drawing of her and says, "It took me like 4 hours to get the shading on your upper lip." And she's horrified. It's like, well, you could always just imply the shadow on the upper lip. And, when it comes to someone who's maybe got a crooked nose like me, or some feature like this that you want to not emphasize too much, you just keep it super subtle. So maybe I might, even erase some of that out and just go be super subtle about it, that there's that irregular shape to my nostril. And using a little pink and peach on the edge of that will also soften it. So that it doesn't just jump from that dark shadow to the light area, so we can see the three-dimensional shift that's happening there. And then likewise adding some of these other values that I'm seeing along the edge of the nostril are gonna help that not feel so flat in that area. Thinking about that little vortex or like a donut or a bagel that's happening around the nostrils. There's a very deep recess there going into the nostrils, and there's a lot of elevational shifts all around that happening. So following those contours is really important there to keep that from looking flat. Okay, and then going back in with my violet. So I've just basically got my peach, my pink, and my violet here. Really building up and blending those three things together. I probably want a little more peach here at this edge with the little donut And then I want some pink on top of that, and then some purple on top of that. If you've got a red violet in your kit, this is where that red violet would come in really handy. Oops, I just accidentally drew a weird pink line all the way across it. All right, so I feel like I'm spending longer on this than I really wanted to, but I want to get this all blended out a little bit more. Just blending out this shadow as it gets pretty dark, but it gets darker along the part of the nose where it, you know, dips and curves into the flatter part of my cheek. So on the higher elevational point, it's not quite as dark, and that's where we've got that peach color underneath and more of the green and blue. I'm kind of blending into that with the peach again. Green, but I lost it. Yeah, that green maybe seems weird at first, but once we get it in there, that just really starts to make it feel more like what a shadow would look like falling across a nose in realistic light, right? So it maybe feels weird to use a color like that, but since we have so many pinks and rose violets and warmer colors going, it doesn't feel unusual to do that. I'm gonna need my other nostril filled in here. So it's just a small little aspect of that nostril that appears dark violet. The rest of it, I'm gonna use a lot of pink. And probably would have used that rose violet if I had it right here. And then there's this subtle little shadow. This is one of those things that I wouldn't want to emphasize too much or make it too dark of a value, because then it's going to look like somebody punched me or something right there. But there is a little darker shadow along the bottom. So if you were, you know, working on a different part of the face, same thing. It might feel like, oh, I'm going to make the person look bruised, but you're not. As long as you're keeping the values on the value scale in the range that they are. Like, I'm looking for my little scratch paper where I showed my value scale. So if we're talking about that value scale from 0 to 10, 10 being the absolute dark and 0 being the absolute light, you know, maybe we have more of like a subtle light value here. I let this get pretty dark with charcoal. But, you know, if I were to put a shadow on the underside of my nose and make it like a 9 or a 10, then yeah, it's going to look, excuse me, weird and bruisy. But since I'm keeping it nice and light, and I'm going to blend it out with that pink a little more, it shouldn't look that way. And you can always erase things out if they do look too dark. But I think as long as you balance them with all of the light that you're seeing, it's just going to lend itself to feeling more realistic. But I get that it feels scary to people to do that and they resist it. I see it in my drawing and painting classes in person all the time, people just not wanting to go to do something that's gonna, you know, quote unquote, ruin their drawing. And instead they end up playing it extremely safe and being dissatisfied with it because it doesn't feel realistic. And light is very dramatic when it falls across our faces. So we do have shadows that get super dark. We do have, you know, recesses on our faces, like under our eyes and under our nose, etc., where there are shadows, and there's a way to subtly suggest those things without emphasizing them so much and capture something that feels more realistic without making it look strange. And I think it actually looks more strange when you don't have those things. It's going to look flat. It's not going to look as three-dimensional because you're not showing the darkest shadows. But everything I just said is one of those rules that is going to be broken a little bit whenever we do I mean, it's not really a rule. It's just a way to make things look more three-dimensional if they feel flat. It's to emphasize those shadows a little more. But when we move on to the pen and ink here in just a moment, we are going to be a little more subtle with our values. Okay, and oh my goodness, I spent almost an hour on this chalk pastel nose. So let's move on here to the pen and ink portion of the class. I definitely got sucked into that one. I think I captured more of what my nose actually looks like though in that one than the other one. Okay, so let me move this aside here and put my chalk pastels away. And I'm going to do another quick little review of pen and ink drawing from the I class. And the cat is trying to pay me a visit because she wants to make my life difficult. And hopefully she's going to stay right there. Okay, so we're going to get started with the chalk pastel pencils to draw the one of our noses here, and then the other one we're just going to draw it with pen only. So I know we are running out of time, but we actually don't need too much more time to draw these last two noses because of the minimal use of lines that we're going to use. So I was just talking about kind of a more is more strategy for the nose there with all those colors and building up. And then with this, we're going to do more of a less is more strategy. Let me just find my original drawings of the pen and ink noses here. Got too many things on my desk. Too many. Here we go. Okay, so yeah, we're going to start out drawing those contours of the nose, and then we're going to go very lightly so we can add the pen and ink on top. And then we're going to erase the contour line drawing underneath, and then we're going to draw a nose just using pen only. But you're welcome to use the chalk pastels or graphite if you're more comfortable with graphite underneath, whatever you are most comfortable with. Okay, so I'm going to take one of my lighter colors like that pink again, and hopefully my lines are going to show up with that. And then just real quick, I want to review the shading techniques that we're going to be using here. So we might get by most of this class with a pretty small nib pen. So like this is the Artist Loft 0.05 here. And just to practice these little shading techniques first, so we've got hatching, cross hatching, stippling, and scribbling. Hatching is one directional lines that overlap until they create a solid black. So thinking about that 10 on the value scale, we're overlapping and repeating until we get to a solid 10, one line at a time. And we're spacing those lines out using less pressure on the pen for our hatching, cross hatching, we're using multiple directional lines. And same thing, we are overlapping to get a darker value, spacing out, using less pressure on the pen for the lighter values. Stippling is one dot at a time. It's the easiest of the shading techniques to control, but it takes the most patience because it's just one dot at a time, and using a thicker nib pen on any of these will help you to, get a darker or thicker mark to happen a little faster. And then you have a scribbling or maybe random mark. And that is where you're just scribbling or making a random mark inside of one of these value shapes. We're filling in one of these values and we're doing it following the contours, and we're using one of these shading techniques to do it. So probably going to use a lot of hatching and cross hatching, but you are welcome to use stippling or scribbling as well. You can see how I'm following those contours and using really light values, and we're going to take more of a less is more approach to the pen and ink because we're going to leave it pretty minimal value. We're also going to use this photo reference that doesn't have a ton of obvious value to it. So the photo itself is pretty minimal. And if you're having a hard time seeing the shapes in this one, then you might jump down here to the bottom where I made it black and white, and then I inverted it. And the inverted light photo, I think, really helps to see where those shadows are, because now all of the shadows that are dark are showing up light, and all of the shadows that are light are showing up dark, which is quite a bit of it because I'm very pale and it was a lot of light in the photo. So we're really focusing on these areas that are showing up white because that's where the shadows are. And we're also going to leave a lot out. So we are really going to be implying a lot of this nose, and we're really just going to add value where those shadows are appearing, and then we're going to leave the rest of it alone. First, let's sketch it based on the contour lines here. And I'm going to go very light with this chalk pastel pencil because I want to be able to erase my lines afterwards. So hopefully nobody's going to be mad at me if it's going to be hard to see these lines on the Zoom. But I'll definitely outline them when I start adding them with pen. Okay, so we're just, first I'm going to start with those shapes. All of those irregular shapes, and maybe you draw it upside down if that helps you to see those irregular shapes. And then, yeah, there's that, unusual shape to my nose. So one of my nostrils kind of takes up more space on my nose. And I got that lopsided angle. And here, my nostril shows up more like a little curved triangle than it does a Nike swoosh. And then I'm leaving, well, I'm not going to leave it totally blank because I'm going to draw those contours in just a second, but I'm leaving my line super light over here. And again, not worried about proportions, not worried about it capturing my specific nose. I mean, you're probably going to have somebody who looks kind of like me, because if you've got that lopsided shape in there, it might be capturing some of my likeness, but I wouldn't worry about exact likeness here and just more try to capture these shapes. Okay, so I've got the basic shapes that I'm seeing there, and now I'm going to draw those contours. So I've got a slope up, and then I've got this like curved, almost, it's not flat, but like a peak of a mountain, like a plateau on a mountain peak that then slopes down in the other direction. You're looking for that little bridge across the cylindrical shape of the nose. and it's feels like an upward curve to me. So we're basically mapping out my nose like this. And I would use that blue color that would show up all nice and dark, but I want to be able to go over this with pen and then erase the lines. So we've got a curve like this along the eyelids. We've got a curve down right here into the little recess area. And then it becomes a little more flat here at the top. You know what, maybe for the sake of the Zoom, let me use a darker color. I'll use this violet, and I might not be able to erase the lines, but I want y'all to be able to see my lines. Let me try the blue one instead. Okay, so I'm looking for this upward curve. So I want you to draw these because these will help you to see how your pen lines are going to follow. And then we've got a curve down right here. And then there's this kind of unusual shape to my nose that does this. So the circular part is kind of over here to the side. And then there's one little donut or bagel over here. Another little donut or bagel over here. Like little firework lines. And then those are going to hug the sides of the nostrils. I'm going to hug that same shape there. We're going to imply this, so it's going to be really subtle, but there is more of a flat situation happening right here. And then this subtle little curve down right here. We're going to make this so subtle, so I'm like, maybe we don't even need to do too much right here. Then we could think about like a flatter, more diagonal line here across the side. And then on the vertical axis, it's following that same curve from the eyebrow right here. And then here, there's a curve up. And then a curve along the side of that cylinder there. Okay, so that's what we're looking for. Maybe I'm not going to be able to erase these lines under the pen too much since I drew them so dark. So I'm going to just take the top layer of my eraser and just go over, or take my eraser and just take the top layer off of that a little bit. All right, and then I'm going to take my pen. I'm using a really small nib, so the 0.1, or maybe even smaller than that, like the where'd it go? The 0.03. Yep, that's what I'm looking for. All right, so I like to start out super light because I can always, I think it's easier for me to build up lightly and then increase my pressure on the pen. But if you are, yeah, if you're a little heavy-handed like me, then if you start out with a really light nib and try to go with light pressure, and so I'm looking at these values and I'm looking at that curve and I'm starting to follow that curve down and just starting to sketch in those values that I'm seeing there. And I'm going to try to erase my lines even more in just a moment once I start to get these in there. And hopefully you're seeing what I mean about following the contours with your lines. And we're just going super light. So the movement is really coming from my whole arm, which I talk about a lot throughout all of my classes, how we draw with our whole arm and not just our wrist. We actually have more control over our drawing materials. I'm bouncing around here quite a bit because it's all pretty light. There's just not a whole lot of obvious dark value happening here. So let me try to erase some of my pencil lines again so that we're just seeing the pen. Now hopefully you've got all that in your sketch already. Some of it's just going to be there because I used that blue. So in the dark part of the nostril here, I can overlap until I get more of a solid dark to happen. And then I'm just keeping my values nice and light here for the edge of the nostril, keeping it really minimal. And so the idea is that if we just suggest these shadowy shapes where we're seeing them and we follow the contours that, just like the student who painted the light and a nose appeared, we're drawing the light or we're drawing the shadows, leaving the light blank, and hopefully a nose is going to appear. I'm keeping it really soft and subtle along these edges. But as I'm doing that, I'm following these contours. So my values are describing these value shapes that fall along these elevational shifts. And so if all of my hatching and cross hatching lines are following that elevation that we sketched out, then this nose should just emerge out of these values for us. So if I kind of slope down with my hatching lines in a way that follows that recess, should come across, and there's nothing wrong with exaggerating in these darker shadows a little bit to make it come across even more. So even though it really doesn't get that dark here, I'm just going to go ahead and make it a little darker in the darkest part of the shadow, just for emphasis and to create a little drama. And there is this one moment right here on the side of the nostril where it does get a little darker for a bit. So I'll do that a little bit and then blend it out. And yeah, if you want to emphasize a couple of other shadows just to make it come forward a little more, just try to resist the urge to do that all the way around and have a hard line all the way through. And then I did add a few little freckles because it was fun to put a few little dots for freckles in some places. Okay, let's see how we're doing. 7-11, not bad. So, and yeah, if you're having a hard time seeing those value shapes, maybe use more the inverted light to sketch that. Okay, so now I want to do this last one using this photo of my daughter in the sunlight. Where we have these really dramatic shadows. So we have the inverted light photo, we have the black and white photo version of it, and the true light photo. So we're looking for those organic light shapes again. And here comes my kitty, and she's hopefully not going to jump on my desk. I'm going to switch to another piece of paper, I think. So let's scoop that up too much more. Okay, so I'm going to go in with pen first. And if that feels scary, then don't do it. You can use a pencil first. You can use graphite. But I teach lots of classes on drawing in pen and ink. I mentioned some of my work. I use calligraphy ink for a lot of my work. So I'm big on pen and ink drawing, and I'm big on treating pen and ink drawing like a sketching tool and not treating it like it's precious and every drawing that we do has to be perfect. So if you want to join me in, being risky here and just doing a sketch and not putting too much pressure on yourself for a product, then I encourage you to do that. But if you're, worried about the outcome, then you can sketch in pencil first so you have a little more control. You might even do this again first so you know where you're putting the values. But I'm just gonna go really lightly with this small nib pen and start to sketch the darkest shadowy shape that I'm seeing. And it's a very irregular shape here. Feels kind of like the bat symbol. And I'm keeping it really dotted and implied. I'm picking up my pen and not really putting it down in some places. Okay, until I get that shape that I'm starting with. And then within that shape, I've got the nostrils, which feel like more like little rainbows here. So like a little rainbow shape here to start, or like a tunnel. Because we're looking up into the nostrils here, right? So in talking about the perspective on that cylinder, or sphere or cone or whatever you want to think about the basic shape that these create, we're looking up. So we're seeing the underside. So we're going to have some different contours here for this part of the nose. And then we've got a darker shadow. Almost feels like eyes inside there. Inside of the darkest part of the nostril. And then there's another little shift here in the shadow where it appears darker in the bottom part of the shadow under the nose, but right here at the edge of the nose, it's a little lighter. See how I left a little bit of light right here and got a little darker on that side. Okay, and then I'm gonna really lightly, I'm using my whole arm here, start to like sweep up and notice some of these contours. I'm gonna go ahead and just put the contours in with my pen. So I'm looking for this shift here. And then this is actually pretty flat under the nose, even though it does dip down and curve in the middle there. And I'm going to use kind of a diagonal hatching line here to fill in this whole thing. And since it gets so dark inside of the nostrils here, I can go ahead and fill that whole thing in like a blanket value. And I know my lines are not showing up totally dark yet with this pen, but they will as I start to build up the values a little more. Okay, and then we're exaggerating again the shadows that we're seeing up here on the bridge of the nose and in the shadows of the eyes. So I'm gonna look at the inverted light photo here, and everywhere that I'm seeing white is where I'm going to start to sketch up here into the bridge. And then I've got this curved and a ribbony triangle on both sides where there's that concave area on the side of the eyes that we've been contouring and studying so much throughout these almost 3 hours of drawing noses now. It's an hour and a half last week and an hour and a half almost today. Right, so I'm looking at those contours and starting to put those in just like in the last sketch. And then now it's just a matter of overlapping and blending out my values to make that show up even more. So I like to build confidence in my mark making in a sketch by starting in the darkest shadows. And you know, the beautiful thing about cross hatching is it really doesn't have to be perfect. I just made a couple of little, what I might call mistakes up there, some unintentional marks, and then I'm just blending them out, making them disappear a little bit more. And also just want to have a little disclaimer here that, like I said, pen and ink is my specialty. It's the medium I draw in the most. I have been drawing primarily with pen and ink for over 10 years. So, you know, if this is new to you, please don't compare yourself to what I'm doing, because this is something I do all the time. Okay, and then yeah, in these darkest parts of the shadow, we can get nice and solid black in here. We might even switch to a thicker nib, since it's going to get pretty dark black. Although I think it's kind of nice to still just build up your values, but just to make it stand out here in that darkest part of the nostril, I might use a thicker nib. And yes, I'm using the Artist Loft illustration pens here from Michaels. If I'm going to go back to my smaller nib, this is a 0.05. So if it's got a point and then a 0, you know that it's an even smaller nib. And then I was using a 0.03 as well. Just a little bit darker than the 0.05. Okay, so we're looking for this little radius here, this like, you know, think about what the elevation is doing there. I'll show you in the other example how I made my lines sort of radiate out from the center there to illustrate that little tunnel opening. And then I can see this curve of the tunnel and the nostrils right there. So just curving down with my horizontal lines there to get that to come across. And then right here, we've got this interesting shape. I might draw this on a separate piece of paper here. Let's see, we've got enough time for me to do that. Let me draw this a little bigger on another piece of paper. My bigger nib so everybody can see it. So we've got this sort of a shape, like an upside down gumdrop here. So this is the underside of the nose. like a little cereal bowl shape right here, and you can see it in the shadow. I think it's obvious, but it might not be obvious to you how it curves like this, and then on the vertical axis, it does this. So just like a little cereal bowl here. So that's exactly the contours that I'm looking for on the underside of the nose there. Starting with a really light nib and keeping it super light and blendy here. I'm just doing that same sort of thing across that cereal bowl shape. And then up here, it's going to be more of a curve into that little Batman symbol shape that we drew. So you're just following those contours. And we're going to build up until it's pretty dark here in the center, because that cereal bowl shape really stands out to me. It kind of goes up and then maybe feels like a little duck or a dog or something. If we're talking about this particular value shape, it's like the base of the dog's body is the cereal bowl. And then it's got like a little head on it over here because it goes up into the, everybody seeing that little duck or dog shape I'm talking about there? It's okay if you're not. It comes with time. Like I said, some people have a really hard time seeing these shapes. And then we've got this little donut thing happening here. So we want to make sure that's obvious, but not too obvious. I'm going to imply just with a light little value there, that little curve out. And then this little crescent shape for the side of the nostril there. Same thing over here. Looking at those particular shapes as they show up in the photograph. Trying to match those. Yeah, if you feel like you're overworking an area, maybe bounce around and jump to a different part of the nose for a bit. Okay, and then we need to go pretty dark in this little underside shadow. And then even in this part, we want it to appear dark, just not quite as dark as the rest of the shadow. So I'm just building up those values inside of this big shadowy shape that we started with. And honestly, if you match the value shape with pens, you don't necessarily have to have like a deep understanding of the contours. I mean, you should if you want to like really match those 3 dimensions, but like there's this little dip down into the little cleft under the nose here, but we didn't draw the contours there. We're drawing it kind of flat, but it still starts to feel like it's dipping down just because we're matching the value. So in a lot of cases, just matching the value will suggest the contours. The light is telling you everything you need to know. But it's hard to turn off all those distractions and patterns, especially in unlearn all those patterns of drawing, you know, more from our imagination and the symbols that we have to even be able to just pay attention to what the light is doing. But if you can manage to do that and just draw the light shapes. The light will suggest the contours. All right, I made that nose a little lopsided, but that is okay. We weren't worried about perfect proportions here. All right, we've got just a few minutes left. I'd love to see y'all's examples. If you want to hold them up, we can spotlight you. The cat is walking across my painting for next week. All right, this is Tatiana. Looks like using a lot of graphite. It's kind of hard to see your lines, but I see some, I think I see that cereal bowl shape there. So that's great. Yeah, you'll just keep going and blending out on that. This is Sherry. Oh yeah, look at that drama. Yeah, exactly. That's beautiful. You really captured both of those. And this is Barbara. Oh, that's really nice, Barbara. I love that green and purple along that darker shadow. It's really nice. This is Patricia. Gonna turn it to faceless, Patricia. I don't see the drawing. I think your background is making it disappear. Yeah, those, oh, you are holding it up, but yeah, your back, probably have to turn off that AI background that you have there. This is Skylar. Oh, look at that. You even got some of my eye in there. That's lovely. Yeah, I see that little duck-shaped shadow on the underside of the nose. That's great. That really makes that dramatic shadow come across. This is Cecilia. Very nice. Yeah, I'm really feeling the like donut shape contours on those nostrils in your pen and ink examples. Really feeling those 3 dimensions there. Let's see. It's kind of getting lost in the light a little bit there. Okay, yeah, that's really nice. Yeah, beautiful blending there. Your values are nice and soft. This is May. Ooh, that's nice. And subtle values. Your contours are really strong as well. Can you hold it back a little bit so I can see the other ones? Yeah, those are really nice. That looks like Demetrius up there on the top left, and then I can recognize my nose there on the right. That's lovely. That looks like part 1 and part 2. Michelle, we've got you spotlighted. Oh, okay. This is Josh. Oh, look at that lovely line work. Really nice. Yeah. Feels like a Rembrandt sketch to me. You really captured a nice little stylized quality with that line work. I love it. And you're definitely describing those contours. Okay, this is Michelle again. Hold it up a little higher. Oh, yes, that's lovely. Look at all that soft blended light and value. All right, gorgeous work, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you next week. We'll be starting on this little 2-part class on water-soluble oils on a Artist Loft canvas there. Thank you all so much, and you'll have a wonderful evening.